Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Tony Versandi. I'm a business banker with WellsFargo, and I'm excited to be here on behalf of the Alaska Bankers Association, and thank you all for coming today. So first off, the Bankers Association is excited to see any new development that's happening in the interior. The growth of the interior, the F-35 program is very exciting, as I'm sure you can imagine. So what I thought I would do today is provide some background into how a bank would view multifamily residential new construction, okay? And sort of go through some of the details about that. And I'm actually here as much as a student as any of you are. I'm excited to hear from all of our speakers and learn more. So what I'm going to go through is commercial loans on these kinds of properties, what a bank's appetite is for these types of deals, construction and term notes, the different features of those, ideal scenarios that might present themselves to attain financing for these kinds of projects, some of the underwriting guidelines we go through, and then just some last thoughts to wrap up. So, moving along, again, this is looking at these projects as conventional bank-financed commercial loans, not using a government program or any other type of participation or guarantee. Non-owner occupied, multifamily, residential is not eligible for SBA financing. I'm not sure if the USDA would participate on these kinds of deals, but that's the perspective that I'm going to be speaking from. So, multifamily housing provides some challenges to commercial underwriting for a few different reasons. One of those is that there tends to be shorter leases, usually 12 months or less. There tends to be greater vacancies in the properties and increases in broken leases and other challenges that might come about that are more difficult to estimate than a typical commercial lease. As bankers, we try to look ahead at that and mitigate the risks associated with it. In addition to that, there is some history of a couple of sour projects in this space in Fairbanks. Those of you that have been around for a long time may be aware of some of those, but in the past we've seen situations where the government decides to build the spaces themselves on the bases, or perhaps they never occupy the units for whatever reason might have come about. So this does present some risk associated with these kinds of projects. When we think about construction or term debt that goes along with these, first of all, on construction notes, we want to think about the cost. The risk inherent in these is going to be, will the project get done? Will it get done on time and on budget? So fixed price construction contracts are certainly preferable to bankers. Will there be performance bonds? That's an important question to consider. And bankers typically prefer to work with contractors that have a proven history of coming in on time and on budget. So that'll be some of the considerations that go along with financing a construction note on these kinds of housing units. When we think about term notes, again, because of some of the difficulties inherent in multifamily, the shorter leases, et cetera, most banks will look for a little bit more cushion when it comes to loan-to-value ratio. So that being said, 75% is most likely the maximum loan-to-value ratio. Several of the bankers I spoke to in preparation of this meeting talked about using that 75% number vis-a-vis either cost or appraisal, whichever's less. So wanting a 25% cash position from the builder or from the borrower in order to finance the project. Now, some institutions may go up to 80, but that's probably the top. So just something to keep in mind. Most commercial banks want to keep their terms to a 25-year amortization with a 10-year balloon at the end of it as a max. Shorter terms are going to be preferable. Fully amortized is the way to my heart, personally. I much prefer to see a note pay off without a balloon in 10 or 15 years. If the project can cash flow that would be my preference. So moving on. Ideal situations, this is just one that I think gets you a lot closer to home when we think about financing this. The perfect scenario would be that the borrower obtains a longer term lease from the Air Force or another military unit to rent out a block of units for a longer period, maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years. This mitigates the vacancy risk, and it also streamlines the administration of dealing with rent collection, expenses, et cetera. It all of a sudden becomes a much more appealing project, right? Now again, that's ideal. That may not be the reality. It'll be interesting to see. Wanted to share with you some underwriting aspects that we look at, a little peek behind the curtain. Basically, we have the 5 C's of credit. Okay, they are character, capacity, capital, collateral, and conditions. I like to say if all 5 of these make sense, usually you have a deal. If 4 out of 5 do, you might still have a deal. 3 out of 5 is getting harder. 2 out of 5, not looking too great. So character speaks to the borrower's willingness to repay the note, to work with the lender if there are difficulties, to come up with plans to find ways to come out whole for both parties. Capacity speaks to the ability of the borrower to make loan payments. So if a company wants to borrow $10 million and their gross revenue is $100,000, it doesn't matter what their character is. They don't have the capacity to make those payments. So capacity is very important. Capital is the balance sheet information. What kind of capital does the company have to support their ongoing business operations, to finance their portion of the project, and to meet obligations that may come up that are unexpected. Collateral is the security that we take in a loan. In this case, it would be the multifamily residential buildings. And bankers will want to identify the quality of the collateral. What is the possibility to collect the loan amount should you need to liquidate? So every commercial banker will look for at least 2 forms of repayment, the primary source of repayment and a secondary source. In this scenario, the primary source is going to be the lease income. And then the secondary is typically liquidation of the collateral. If the collateral loses a lot of its value in the event that the first source doesn't work out, that's not a very good secondary source either, and we definitely want to analyze that before we do that. And conditions are the external conditions that happen in any business environment. So the example I typically use is somebody who manufactures horse and buggies in 1915. They got a great business, great character, cash flow's terrific, collaterals might be good, but when the Model T comes out, that external condition neutralizes their business altogether. So we need to look at all 5 of those. Another aspect of underwriting these deals is a real estate debt service coverage ratio. Well, I shouldn't say ideally. Every real estate project that we do that's investor, that relies on lease payments, those lease payments need to pay for the loan after expenses are taken out. So an easiest way to do that is you take your gross income or your gross rents, deduct all your expenses, get to your net income, add the depreciation back in because that's not a cash expense, divide that by your debt payments for the year, and then you come up with your debt service coverage ratio, which most banks require to be either 1.10 to 1.25 at a minimum. And what that means is that for every dollar of debt that's out there, you have $1.10 to $1.25 available to make payments. And that cushion's necessary because of unexpected expenses, and ideally you'd like your business to have profit left over after you pay your debt payments. So those are some of the underwriting aspects that we think about. When it comes to real estate specific loans, more and more we're thinking about environmental due diligence. We're thinking about the locations where we are. Have there been spills? Have there been issues that present long-term questions? And so we want to work on that. That increases the expense of the project, and if there's monitoring wells, it can make the project more difficult to accomplish. There also can be title issues to think about. Is the land going to be fee simple? Is it leased land? If it's leased land, then the lease needs to be at least twice as long as the loan term for a typical real estate loan. If it's fee simple, that makes it a little better because there's actual ownership of the land, but stuff to think about. I actually don't remember why I included insurance, but it is an additional expense. Oh, never mind. on a commercial lease, you typically can package the insurance into the rents that you collect. Residential rents typically don't work that way. So that expense is something also to consider when you're calculating your debt payments. If you're a builder who's built a lot of commercial properties, that may be something to think about. And a large issue is appraisal issues. We're going to be building 800 units in a market where a lot of that may be speculative. And will the buildings appraise where they need to in order to make loans work in this way? So that is all things to keep in mind. So a couple of last thoughts for me, for the Bankers Association. Actually, the second bullet should probably be first. There's still a lot of unknowns in this project, right? There's some things we're not sure about. Like I said, is it going to be leased land? Is it going to be fee simple? We don't really know that portion yet. But it's really helpful to be involved in a forum like this so that we can learn a little bit more about what's coming down the road. We also want to consider how many of the 800 new units will the real estate market support if vacancies are higher than expected, if something changes a few years down the road in the allocation of resources at various bases across the country. What is that going to look like? There is quite a bit of empty space currently in the market, especially commercial space. Residential is a little tighter, but I think there's still some available residential space. That's going to affect appraised values, things like that. Location, right, the real estate thing. Are these units going to be in Salcha? Are they going to be between the base and North Pole? Will they be in North Pole? Will they be on the base? All that stuff makes a big impact. And then a couple of words of advice. If you really want to be in on this market, start saving up capital now. Building up capital for the next couple of years, getting ready for this is going to be very important to actually financing projects. And I would also suggest building a relationship with your banker now. Banks, we're just people, or I shouldn't say the bank's just a person, but all of us that work there are people, and we build relationships with borrowers. We learn a lot about them and their history. So we're very excited to work with borrowers that we know very well, and we will go out on a limb a little bit more for borrowers we've worked with on projects before and have been through the cycles, the ups and downs. So start building your relationship now. Urgency is definitely the enemy of good loans and loan approvals. So work on all that, and we're excited to learn how this is going to go over the next few years. And I look forward to questions. Thank you very much.